The night my life turned into a nightmare started in a way that felt unreal, almost like a bad dream you can't wake up from. It wasn't a storm. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't a random accident that took everything I'd worked for. No, it was because of one person, a single, petty, power-hungry woman who wore her HOA president title like a crown and believed she ruled the neighborhood like her own personal kingdom. Her name? Karen. And I'm not talking about the kind of mild irritation you feel when someone leaves their trash can out too long. I'm talking about calculated, obsessive hatred that built up over months until it turned into something destructive. I woke up at exactly 2:47 a.m., choking on thick, bitter smoke. My dog, Max, was barking like his life depended on it, which, I later realized, it actually did. At first, I thought maybe my fireplace was acting up, but then I saw the orange flicker dancing along the walls and ceiling. My cabin by the lake, the home I had built with my own two hands after my wife passed, was on fire. The panic hit me like a freight train. I scrambled out of bed, yanked open the door, and that's when the heat hit me full force. The air outside was freezing, but the flames devouring my cabin roared so hot it felt like I'd stepped into the mouth of an oven. I grabbed Max by his collar, my phone from the nightstand, and bolted barefoot down the dirt road. Every step I took felt like running through a nightmare I couldn't escape from. The gravel cut into my feet, but I didn't feel it, not until later. And then I saw her. Across the street, leaning against her SUV under the sickly yellow glow of the street lamp, stood Karen. Her arms were folded, and her face was twisted into the kind of smirk you only see on someone who's enjoying the suffering of another person. She didn't run to help. She didn't shout for neighbors. She just watched as my life went up in flames. She and I had been on bad terms since the day I moved into the neighborhood. I'd made the unforgivable mistake of not joining her HOA. I wasn't legally required to, my property was outside their jurisdiction, but that didn't stop her from insisting I had to follow community guidelines and pay maintenance fees. When I refused, she escalated. First, it was letters in my mailbox about violations, like the color of my cabin's shutters or the fact that I parked my truck in my own driveway. Then it was phone calls and friendly visits reminding me that she could make life very difficult if I didn't cooperate. The final straw came when I caught her trying to pressure another neighbor into selling their lakefront lot to her cousin for half its value. I reported it to the county, and let's just say, Karen didn't take kindly to someone interfering with her little empire. From that day forward, she made me her personal enemy. And now, standing there in the freezing dark while my home burned, I knew, deep down in my bones, that she was behind this. The fire trucks took 11 minutes to arrive. 11 minutes that felt like hours as the flames chewed through my walls and the roof collapsed in on itself with a deafening crash. My furniture, my tools, the antique fishing rods my father left me, every photograph of my wife, gone. I stood there shivering, Max pressed against my leg, staring at the smoldering ruin that had been my home. The fire marshal was professional but blunt. We'll investigate, but cases like this are hard to prove unless we find direct evidence. Direct evidence. That was the phrase that stuck in my head. I didn't have it, not yet, but I had something just as strong, certainty. I knew in my gut she had done this. And when you know someone has destroyed your life, you have two choices: you let it break you, or you start fighting back. I made my choice right then and there. I was going to get justice. I didn't care how long it took, how much money it cost, or how clever she thought she was. If the law wasn't going to hand me justice, I'd drag her into it myself, step by step, until she couldn't wriggle out. Karen thought she'd won. She thought she'd burned me out of my own home and scared me into leaving for good. But what she didn't know was that she'd just lit a different kind of fire, a fire in me. And I was going to make sure it burned a whole lot longer than the one that took my cabin. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the cab of my truck with Max curled up beside me, staring at the blackened shell of my cabin as the last wisps of smoke curled into the sky. The smell of burnt wood clung to my clothes, my hair, my skin. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the flames again. But I also saw Karen's smug face under that street lamp, like she was standing in her own private gallery, admiring her work. By sunrise, I had a plan, not a vague idea, but a step-by-step strategy. I wasn't going to run to social media and start ranting. I wasn't going to storm over to her house screaming accusations. No, Karen was a snake, and you don't catch a snake by stomping around. You wait, you watch, and you set the perfect trap. First, I called my lawyer, Mark. He's an old friend of mine from my years in construction, and he's the kind of guy who's both calm and ruthless in a courtroom. When I told him what happened, he didn't try to sugarcoat anything. If she did this, we're going to need proof, more than eyewitness suspicion. Cameras, recordings, documents, witnesses. Everything. That was fine with me. I'm a patient man when I need to be. While the fire marshal's investigation moved slowly, I started my own. Step 1 was security cameras, ironically, something I'd put off for years because nothing ever happens out here. That changed fast. I borrowed a set of trail cameras from a friend who hunts deer, the kind that record both video and audio when triggered by motion. I didn't have a house anymore, but I had my land, and I knew Karen liked to snoop around. I set up cameras in the trees near the edge of my property and along the road she'd have to take to get anywhere near it. Step 2 was information. I started talking, carefully, to other neighbors. I didn't accuse her directly. Instead, I asked if anyone had noticed anything strange the night of the fire. That's when the pieces started coming together. One neighbor, Mr. Lawson, told me he saw a dark SUV idling near my property about 30 minutes before the flames started. Another, a younger guy named Eli, mentioned overhearing Karen brag about taking care of problems at a coffee shop the week before. It wasn't a confession, but it was enough to start connecting dots. Step 3 was financial. I knew arson cases often fail because the suspect couldn't have done it or had no reason. So I started digging into Karen's HOA accounts. Public records can be gold if you know where to look. It turned out the HOA's budget was in trouble, big trouble. The kind of trouble that might make a controlling president lash out at someone who refused to join and contribute money. Then, a stroke of luck, or maybe karma, hit. 2 weeks after the fire, one of my trail cameras caught something, Karen herself, walking along the edge of my property during the day, phone in hand, snapping pictures of the ruins. That wasn't illegal, but the smug grin on her face in that footage made my blood boil. More importantly, the audio caught her muttering, "Bet you regret messing with me now." That was the first crack in her armor. I took that to Mark, and his eyes lit up. It's not a smoking gun, but combined with witness statements, the HOA's financial mess, and her history of harassment, we can make this into something solid. That's when we shifted from gathering to baiting. I knew Karen couldn't resist control. If she thought she had a chance to push me off my land completely, she'd take it. So I put out the word, loud enough for it to get back to her, that I was planning to rebuild a bigger, nicer cabin. I let slip that I was meeting with contractors and had insurance money coming in. And sure enough, she showed up, clipboard in hand, pretending to check on reconstruction permits she had no authority over. What she didn't know was that every word was being recorded. Over 3 visits, she made threats, thinly veiled but threats nonetheless, about how it'd be a shame if something happened to the new place and maybe the lake would be safer without you around. By the time we had all of that documented, the fire marshal's report came back. 'Cause of fire? Accelerant poured along the east wall of my cabin. That wasn't just bad luck or faulty wiring, that was deliberate. And while they couldn't name a suspect, it was exactly what we needed to file a civil suit for damages, harassment, and property destruction. But I wasn't stopping there. I wanted her in court, on record, under oath. And I wanted to be the one sitting across from her when she realized she'd walked straight into the trap I'd been setting since the night my cabin burned. The look on her face when she got served with the lawsuit was almost worth all the sleepless nights. Almost. But I knew the real victory was still to come. Inside that courtroom, where all her smug arrogance would mean nothing against the weight of evidence we'd built brick by brick. The first day in court was like walking into a stage play I'd rehearsed for weeks. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and wood polish, the hum of whispered conversations bouncing off the high ceilings. Karen sat across the aisle from me, dressed in a pastel suit like she thought she was here for an HOA luncheon instead of a legal battle. She kept her chin high, eyes darting toward me with that same superior smirk she always wore when she thought she was in control. I didn't even look at her for long, I didn't need to. I knew what was coming, and deep down, I think she did too. My attorney, Mark, wasted no time. He opened with the story of the fire, laying out the timeline in meticulous detail. He didn't embellish or get emotional, he just presented the facts. I'd refused to join the HOA, I'd been harassed multiple times by its president, and then, without warning, my home went up in flames. As he spoke, I kept my eyes on the jury. I could see the shift in their expressions when he mentioned the fire marshal's report about accelerant. It was subtle, but it was there, a tightening of jaws, a slight shake of the head. Then came the witnesses. Mr. Lawson was first, his voice steady as he recalled seeing the dark SUV idling near my property. He didn't point directly at Karen, but when Mark asked him to describe the vehicle, his words lined up perfectly with the one Karen drove. Eli testified next, sharing the overheard conversation at the coffee shop. She said something like, "I take care of problems when they need to be taken care of," he told the court. Karen's lawyer jumped up, objecting on the grounds of hearsay, but the judge allowed it, noting that it spoke to motive and character. That was the first time Karen's smile faltered. And then, it was time for the video. Mark walked over to the evidence screen and hit play. There was Karen, clear as day, walking along the charred remains of my cabin. The jury watched as she pulled out her phone, snapped pictures, and muttered those words, "Bet you regret messing with me now." The sound was grainy, but it was unmistakable. I saw 3 jurors glance at her right after the clip ended. Karen's lawyer tried to argue it was taken out of context, but the damage was already done. The second video was even worse for her. This one showed her during one of her permit check visits, saying, "It'd be a shame if something happened to the new place." Mark let the words hang in the air before slowly turning back to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, does that sound like someone concerned for safety, or does that sound like a threat?" Karen's face was red by now, her mouth set in a thin, angry line. I could almost hear her brain scrambling for a way out, but the more she fidgeted, the more the jury noticed. The fire marshal's testimony sealed it. He explained in simple, authoritative terms that the fire had been started deliberately, with an accelerant poured along the east wall. No lightning strikes, no faulty wiring, just human hands. He didn't accuse Karen outright, but when Mark connected the timeline of her harassment, the witnesses, the videos, and the motive of HOA financial trouble, the picture was too clear to ignore. When it was finally Karen's turn to testify, she walked to the stand with her chin high again, but her eyes didn't meet mine this time. Her lawyer tried to guide her into playing the victim, painting me as a stubborn, unfriendly neighbor who refused to follow community rules. But when Mark cross-examined her, the cracks widened fast. "Ms. Green," he began, his voice calm, "have you ever been on Mr. Miller's property without his permission?" She hesitated just a moment too long before saying, "Not that I recall." Mark pressed a button, and the first video, her walking on my burned property, flashed on the screen again. "Is that you?" She swallowed. "Yes, but, thank you," Mark cut in, not letting her spin it. "Now, Ms. Green, did you ever say, 'Bet you regret messing with me now,' while standing on his burned property?" "I might have. I don't remember exactly. Would you like us to replay the audio? The courtroom was dead silent. Karen's lawyer objected again, but the judge overruled it. We played the clip again, and when it ended, Mark didn't ask her anything for a full 5 seconds. He just let the silence hang there, the weight of her own words filling the room. By the time she stepped down, she was visibly rattled, clutching her purse like a lifeline. The day ended with Mark's closing statement, weaving every piece of evidence into one unbreakable chain. This case isn't about HOA rules, he told the jury. It's about one person's abuse of power, her willingness to destroy someone's home, and the belief that she could walk away without consequences. But in this country, we still believe in accountability. When the gavel struck to adjourn for the day, Karen didn't look at me. She just gathered her things and hurried out, her pastel suit looking less like authority and more like desperation. I stayed in my seat a little longer, breathing in that still, tense air. I could feel it, the tide had turned. She might have thought she was untouchable when she lit that match, but now she was trapped, and the walls of this courtroom were closing in on her. The jury filed back into the courtroom the next morning with an energy that felt different, heavier, decisive. Karen sat rigid at the defense table, her hands clenched in her lap, a thin sheen of sweat glistening at her hairline. I could see her lawyer whispering something to her, but she didn't nod, didn't blink, she just stared straight ahead like maybe, if she didn't move, the verdict would somehow change. The judge entered, and the room went still. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" he asked. The foreman stood, holding a folded slip of paper. "We have, Your Honor." Time seemed to stretch as the bailiff carried the note over. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. The judge unfolded the paper and read aloud, "In the matter of Miller versus Green, on the charge of arson, the jury finds the defendant guilty." The word rang out like a hammer strike. Karen's head jerked slightly, as if she'd just been slapped. She opened her mouth like she might protest, but no sound came out. Her lawyer's shoulders sagged. I didn't move, didn't grin or pump a fist, there was no satisfaction in this moment, just a deep, bone-level relief. But the judge wasn't finished. He continued reading the rest of the verdict: guilty on trespassing, guilty on harassment, and guilty on destruction of property. Each guilty was another nail in the coffin she'd built for herself. The sentence came next: 15 years in state prison, with no eligibility for parole for at least 10. The courtroom murmured with quiet shock. Karen finally broke, blurting out, "This is insane. I built that neighborhood. I am that HOA." The judge banged the gavel sharply. "You abused your position and destroyed another person's home. This is not your neighborhood, it is a community, and you are not above the law." The bailiff stepped forward, cuffs in hand, and for the first time in years, I saw Karen without her armor. The pastel suit looked wrinkled and tired, her hair slightly out of place, her face twisted in disbelief. When the metal clicked around her wrists, her eyes darted to me. It wasn't anger this time, it was fear. They led her out through the side door, and just like that, the woman who had terrorized me for months was gone. I stepped outside the courthouse into the crisp air, the weight on my chest finally lifting. Eli and Mr. Lawson were waiting on the steps, both smiling. "Guess she won't be bothering anyone for a while," Eli said. I chuckled, a sound I hadn't made in weeks. "No," I replied, "she won't." But the story didn't end there. The civil case came next, my lawsuit for damages. With the criminal conviction already in place, my attorney made quick work of it. Karen was ordered to pay for the full reconstruction of my home, plus additional punitive damages. The HOA tried to distance itself from her, but the jury found that the organization had failed to curb her harassment, so they were on the hook for part of the settlement too. In the end, I had enough not only to rebuild the cabin but to make some upgrades I'd always dreamed about. 6 months later, I stood on my new porch, the smell of fresh wood and varnish filling the air. The lake sparkled under the afternoon sun, the water calm and glassy. For the first time since moving here, I felt safe. People from the neighborhood started stopping by, not with demands or rules, but with genuine welcomes. It turned out, many of them hadn't liked Karen either, they'd just been too intimidated to speak up. A few even admitted they'd been on the receiving end of her power trips. As the weeks passed, life settled into a quiet rhythm. I'd have my coffee on the porch in the mornings, watch the herons glide across the lake, and know that I'd fought and won not just for myself, but for anyone who had ever been pushed around by someone who thought they were untouchable. And yet, there was one moment that stayed with me most. A year after the trial, I got a letter, postmarked from the state prison. I almost tossed it without opening, but curiosity got the better of me. It was from Karen. The handwriting was neat, almost delicate. She didn't admit guilt outright, but the tone was different, muted, small. She wrote that she'd lost everything, her home, her position, her so-called friends. She claimed she didn't realize how far she'd gone until it was too late. She ended the letter with a strange line, "You were right, I thought I owned this place. Turns out, it owned me." I didn't write back. Some things don't need closure. The closure was already standing in front of me every morning. The rebuilt home, the peaceful lake, the knowledge that I'd taken back my life. Karen's trap had been her own arrogance, and in the end, it snapped shut right where it belonged, inside that courtroom. Now, every time I hear the wind whistle across the porch rafters or see the reflection of the pines in the lake, I remember that fire not as the end of something, but as the beginning of a life where no one, especially an HOA Karen, could burn me down again.